Hi, this is Dustine from Two Lucky Cats. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pincushion cuff. Hi, this is a new version of the instructions for the pincushion cuff. This is one of the original projects that we posted, and hopefully our videos are getting better, so we decided to redo some of the original videos. Now, the first thing I want to talk to you about in terms of making the cuff is the pattern for the band. Not everyone has the same size wrist, so what I recommend that you do is either take a tape measure and measure your wrist, or if you don't have a tape measure, just take a piece of string and put it around your wrist, and then measure it against a ruler, and then add 1.5 inches to that measurement. So if your wrist is 6 inches, then add 1.5 inches, which would be 7.5 inches. Cut out the pattern that I've made, and just, this would be 7.5 inches. So you could put a line here and cut it off, and then move over the point for the buttonhole, and put it around your wrist. So when you're checking to see if it's the correct size, remember that the buttonhole has to overlap where the button goes. So if it seems like it's going to fit properly, then you can use your pattern to cut out 2 pieces of felt, because it's easier to make an adjustment on the paper. But also, once you cut your pieces out of felt, just make sure it is the correct size, because paper fits differently around your wrist than felt does. This is a little bit more rigid. Alright, so once you have that, you can just cut it out and cut the other pieces out. And we're ready to start making the pincushion. Alright, now I'm going to show you how to do the pincushion cuff in a couple different steps. The first thing that we're going to do is make the pincushion part of the pincushion cuff. So the first thing we're going to do here is attach the flower to the one of the circles that you've cut out. Now what I do, I'm going to be stitching these lines here, and this is part of the decoration, but it also helps hold the flower to the circle. So to make sure that I'm stitching straight, I just take a ruler and I use a disappearing marker, the kind that disappears on its own, not the kind that you have to wet for it to disappear. And I just make lines directly across from each other on these petals. So on and so forth from each one of the corners. Okay, there we go. Make it a little darker so I can see. And then what I'm going to do is put this on top of here, and I'm going to start in each of the corners and just stitch across using the running stitch. And it's really up to you what kind of thread or color you want to use, or how far apart you want to put your stitches. But just stitch across here from every they're different heart petals, so right where the hearts come together, just add a stitching line and stitch them on using the running stitch to attach the flower to the top of the circle. Now once you've done that, you're going to do something similar here with the leaves that go on the bottom of the circle. And again, I just take the ruler and make a line like this from both points here of the leaves. Okay, and then I'm going to put this on to the bottom circle, and again, using the running stitch, start here and stitch down here, and then here and stitch down here. So when you're done, it'll look like this. Okay, the stitches here, and then the stitches in between each heart across to the other side. Alright, now once we have this done, we're going to sew these two pieces together. And to do this, we're going to use an overcast stitch. And here, let me cut this tail off. And we're also going to be beading. And I am using, they're about a size 5 or 6 bead. Now, a lot of times I'll use seed beads, and to sew with the seed bead, to get a needle that will fit through the opening of the smaller seed bead, the 10 or 11 seed bead, I use a size 9 sharp. But because these beads have big holes in it, you really don't have to be too concerned about what type of needle you use. Here, you see that goes right over. And this is an embroidery needle. So you can use any needle that has a hole here big enough for your thread to go through. And in this case, I'm just using some thread. It's a little bit thicker. It's a cotton thread that I hand dye. But you can use embroidery thread or other types of thread to sew around the edge. And what we're going to do is use the overcast stitch. So I'm just going to start in between the two layers here. Okay. And make sure that like that. And then I'm going to start with a bead. Okay. Oh. Okay, there we go. Start with a bead. I think I made this thread a little bit too long. All right. And then I just go 1, 2 stitches. And then when I'm getting ready to make the third stitch, I just get another bead. Pick up the bead and then continue on with your overcast stitch. And then I'll just pull it up like this. And then 1. Now, if you think the beads are too close together, you can always make 3 stitches and then put the bead on. 2. And 3. Okay. There we go. Now, we're going to do this all the way around the edge until we get about here. Then we're going to stop and we're going to fill this with fiber fill. The next step that we want to do is fill the pincushion with fiber fill. And I stopped with my overcast stitching and beading about this far. So I have an opening here that I can put this fiber fill in. You want to stuff it, quite a bit of fiber fill in here, because remember you're going to use it as a pincushion. So you don't want the pins going through, whoops, and stabbing you. So you really want to fill it with quite a bit of fiber fill. So what I do is I get as much in as I possibly can in this opening, and then when I think I have about as much in there as I can get in, then I continue stitching and beading. And I do that about to here. So if it seems like I can get some more fiber fill in, I'll get it in, and if you need something you can just use, you know, a pencil or something that you can just stuff the rest of the fiber fill in. When I think that I can't get any more in, then I just continue stitching around here till I end up where I began, and then I just knot it up off several times with the overcast stitch and cut it off, and that will complete the pincushion part. I did want to point out that you do have 2 choices here in terms of sewing the leaves on to the pincushion. The first ones that I made, I did stitch down the center of each leaf, which makes the leaves lay flat. But on this one, I made my stitching line in between where the two heart shapes come together, and that makes the leaves stand up. So it depends on what look you're going for. Now the next step that we're going to go over is how to attach the leaves, and you're only sewing them to one piece of the cuff. Now I'm using a 3/4 inch button, so you might have to make some adjustments if your button is bigger or smaller, but the measurement should be the same. You know, it shouldn't make that much difference. But what I did on the one end, I measured about 1.25 inches for the side that I was going to put the button on, and then on the other side I measured about 1.5 inches. And for example, here is 1.25 inches, and then I just put the leaf down here. It's 1.25 inches from the end, and I pin the leaf then at 1.5 inches on the other side, and I pinned them, and then I just positioned the other leaves just to get an idea of where they were going to go. And I put the pincushion in the middle. Now it does look like the leaves are being covered up by the pincushion, but when you put it around your wrist, it's on a curve, so you can actually see the leaves better when it's on your wrist, and they're not being covered up. So all I did was use a running stitch, and I started with these leaves, and I attached them with a running stitch. And here, if you want, you can bead them if you want to make it a little fancier. I did the two end leaves, and then I put the other leaves on the inside, and I attached them the same way. Now, too, you can put on your button if you want. You can put it on now. And that's all you need to do. The next thing that we're going to do is to make the wristband. Now I did put this tip on the information sheet. One thing that you're dealing with when you're sewing with felt, it does have a little bit of stretch to it. But the other thing is when you sew on it, it can also make the felt that you're sewing onto shrink up a little bit. So what you may want to do with the piece that you're going to use for the top is cut that out about 1/4 inch longer, and that way if the top piece shrinks a little bit because of the stitching, then the two pieces will be closer to the same size. So the first thing we want to do is take the top piece, and we're going to put the leaves on it. So I just measured down about 1.5 inches from each end, and I positioned a leaf like this, and then on the other end I put about 1.5 inches, put the other leaf down, and then I just put the other leaf on top of it, like this, just to position it and then see where the pincushion will go. Now it looks like that the pincushion is covering up the two leaves, but when you put it over your wrist like this, you'll actually be able to see all the leaves because it curves around your wrist. So what I did was I just took the top two off. Whoops. Took the top two off. Let me put this back on. Measure it again, 1.5 inches, and then I just pinned the bottom two leaves on. And using a running stitch, I just like I did here, I just used a running stitch to stitch down the middle of each leaf. When I got these done, then I just put the other leaves on top and did the same thing to attach the leaves. Now you can just use a regular stitch, or if you want, you can bead it like I did here to add a little bit more bling to it. So once you're done sewing the leaves on, the next thing you want to do is sew the two pieces of felt together to complete the band. And what I usually do is just start at one end, and then I use the overcast stitch, and I just stitch down here and then stitch down to the other end. Now, if one piece is a little bit longer than the other, when you get down to this point, you can just trim this side off and then go around and finish stitching and knot it off where you started. So what you'll have then is something that looks like this. Now the next thing you want to do is put in the buttonhole. So I just made a mark here with my disappearing marker in the center, about 3/4 of an inch like this. And then I just turned it like this, and then with my scissors I just made a little cut. Then I cut the one end and then go over here and I cut the other end. Now I just want to take my button and make sure it'll go through here, which it will. Now I went around it with the overcast stitch. Just started right here and then I just stitched all the way around the slit. And of course, if you know how to do a buttonhole stitch, or you know how to do a blanket stitch, you can use those stitches. But an overcast stitch will work just as well. Now, once you have that finished, just put it on your wrist and make sure that it fits around and that you can put your button on and it'll go through the buttonhole. Now, you do have some leeway here in terms of your fit. You can always move your button over this way or more over to this side, depending on how tight you want your wristband to be. Alright, now the last thing that we're going to do is attach the pin cushion to the wristband. Now let me just point out one thing here. When I made these originally, I did my stitching line down the center of each leaf, and this makes the leaves lay flat. But in this case, I stitched from the middle of these little heart shapes to the other side. And this makes the leaves stand up, so you get more of a three-dimensional effect. So the next thing we're going to do is attach the pin cushion to the band, and we're going to do this by beading the center here, like this. So let me show you how to do that. Alright, the last thing that I'm going to do to complete the pin cushion is attach the cushion to the band part. And I'm going to do this by beading the center, and I'm using about size 5 or 6 seed beads. And they have a pretty big hole in it, so you can use a big needle and a thick thread if you want to do this. So I'm going to try to come up right through the center here. Alright, there we go. There we are. Okey-doke. Let me put this down like this. Got my bead on here. Back down through the center. Oop. Go. And we're going to do this about 4 or 5, maybe 6 times to get enough beads here. And we want to pull it tight. There we go. There we are. So we'll do this about 5 or 6 times to bead the center. And then when you get down maybe to the last couple beads, knot it a few times to make sure that everything is going to hold tight. So I kind of like it this way with the petal standing up. So there we go. There's your pincushion cuff. Alright, here's what the completed pincushion cuff looks like. I hope you enjoyed completing this project with me. We have many more projects here, so come back and see us often. We're always adding new projects here at Two Lucky Cats. This is Dustine. Until next time.